There was a really interesting exchange earlier this week in the U.S. Senate at a hearing between Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut, and Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education, where he pressed her on the reason she was arguing to pull federal funding from certain universities. Take a look at this.
The letter that you sent to Harvard demanding that they make certain changes, you told them that they had to end all of their diversity programs, but that they had to institute Viewpoint Diversity. That doesn't seem to make sense. How do you tell them to end all their diversity programs? And we assume that this is a mandate that you will make of other schools as well. How do you ask them to end diversity programs while instituting Viewpoint Diversity? Those seems to be totally contradictory.
No, the diversity programs that we've asked and demanded to be eliminated were the DEI, where they were those programs actually were pitting one group against another.
Okay, there's already a couple things there we need to unpack. Number one, her quote, I believe, was, that was the DEI. That was the DEI. So we've seen this time and time again, where folks who are opposed to programs that are designed to bring about more equity, more inclusion, celebrate diversity, etc., simply use the acronym, don't say the words, and maybe don't really even understand what's happening. I think that's what's going in here, when she calls it the DEI, as if it's some sort of a monolith of something that terrible that colleges and universities do. So that's one problem. And she goes on to ostensibly explain the DEI by saying that these are programs that are pitting one group against the other. Fascinating. I mean, understanding history, understanding social interaction is understanding that groups have been against one another, that there's winners, there's losers, etc., and that those wins and losses are not random. It's interesting that it's only pitting a group against each other when the desire is to remove obstacles to bring about more equity. One might argue that it's constant pitting against one another, and when we don't acknowledge it, it continues to foster inequities in our system and inequality in our society. That doesn't seem to be where she's coming from. But then she pivots pretty quickly to this interesting nugget.
Viewpoint diversity is exchange of ideas that's actually better, absolutely. Now here, because Harvard only has 3%, by its own numbers, 3% conservative faculty, do you think they are allowing enough of viewpoint diversity through that teaching?
I don't have any idea where she got the 3% number. She claims that it's a Harvard internal statistic. I won't quibble with that. Maybe it's true. It seems odd. Every college and university has some number of conservative folks, usually in the business school, but in other places as well, in technology, some of the science and technology areas. But nonetheless, let's go with her number. Let's say it's 3%. And then we ask the question, why might that be? Irrespective of what the actual percentage is on any college campus, it is absolutely true that most college professors are left of the political spectrum. They find themselves to be progressive or Democrats, or however you want to, liberals, whatever. And there are some interesting reasons for that, probably primarily because we're the only ones who are willing to work for these wages, to go to school for this long, get this much education, and work for wages that are far below what many of us would receive in industry. Not all of us. There's some fields where there's not really an industry component that is compatible. But most of the folks that are working in higher ed could be working in the private sector somewhere, making a lot more money than we're making here. We do it because we believe in the greater good, and that may correlate with a notion of political progressivism. So that's a fair assumption. What's not fair, though, what's completely off base, is the assumption that she makes that because people are personally progressive, that they're not allowing viewpoint diversity, whether that means in the classroom or encouraging through their research agendas or whatever. That's a lot of psychological projection, I think, from folks on the right. If you talk to students, conservative students, many of them will say that they've encountered mostly progressive professors, but the vast majority of them, at least at most colleges, will say that they didn't feel particularly oppressed, or certainly their grades did not suffer. There's lots of viewpoint diversity. In fact, that's the point of liberal education, is helping students to understand how to rationally go through evidence-based research, to question their own assumptions. It solidifies their preconceptions in lots of ways. That's the basis of a liberal education. So this notion that just because you've got self-proclaimed progressives in higher ed, it's indoctrination. I think it's always funny that people who went to college and find themselves conservative never ask the question how they were able to avoid the indoctrination that they claim is so rampant. The fact is, it's not rampant. Senator Murphy then goes on to press her to say, what statutory authority, what law do you have to take away funding if you're not satisfied with viewpoint diversity? And her argument is Title VI. She claims it's a civil rights issue. Interestingly, she starts with the notion of anti-Semitism. I think that's fair, given what's happened over the last couple of years. But she notes that then they move to discuss other things. And this is where it makes absolutely no sense. I mean, protection for Jews against anti-Semitism is absolutely a civil rights issue. Protection of people, students who have conservative ideas from having those ideas challenged in college is not a civil rights issue. In fact, the whole point of college is to learn to be uncomfortable, to sit with the discomfort, to progress and become more intellectual, et cetera, and that you have to have ideas challenged to do that. And Chris Murphy, of course, calls BS on that entire line of questioning.